Right, we are now going to work on a dress with sleeves. Considering that Chad is a Muslim country, they believe that girls should have their shoulders covered. This dress is a more advanced option, so we're adding it as a bonus. If you'd like to try this, it's more of an advanced option, go for it. We have every faith that you will be able to sew this. What you will need: you will need fabric, 1 yard and 1/8 at least. If it's directional fabric, meaning it has a pattern that only goes one way, you will need more fabric. I have chosen to use a curtain that we have not used in the last 3 houses. So I figure it's a good time to repurpose this nice lightweight cotton. Notice there's no backing, it's just cotton fabric. And I really like the pattern, so I would even love a dress out of that. You will also need the patterns. These 2 pieces of paper are PDF files on the StuttgartGirlScouts.org webpage, along with this project. You will need to print these out. Notice that there are gauges there. So if you are trying to do this in Imperial, make sure that when you print this out, that square is 1 inch by 1 inch, or that this square is 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. Same with this page. There is 1 inch by 1 inch, or 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. If these pages print out and your gauge is straight, then you will be able to make a size 8 pattern. If the measurements are off, then the size of the dress will be off. We've only included size 8, so if you want to make it smaller or bigger, you'll have to do the gauge. When you print those out, you can choose, this sleeve is the sleeve. You're done. If you choose, you can take this page right here and see how it's lined up on the fold line? From the armpit, we recommend that you go from the armpit down to the bottom 28 inches or 72.5 centimeters. This will make it long enough. So if you feel like, here is our 28 inches from the armpit, or centimeters, 72 centimeters. That's at 72.5. If you're around 72 centimeters, or 28.5 inches, 72.5 centimeters, if you're around there, that will be a nice length, because once again, this is a Muslim country. The longer the dress, the better. So if you feel like taking this piece of paper, making it the top, and then continuing on, you can. We just chose to only include the top page because once you get the angle, that's all you need. So we're saving paper by not doing that. Other supplies that you will need are a seam gauge, scissors. If you have a mat and a cutting board and a rotary cutter, that can also work, very helpful. Or scissors do the same thing that all of those do. You'll need 1/4 inch elastic, which you can also see is 0.64 centimeters or 1/4 inch, this wide. It will be handy to have 2 safety pins. If you have a seam gauge like this, or if you have a measuring tool like this, very handy. You'll also want to have pins and your trusty seam ripper. Every good seamstress knows failure is just your first attempt in learning, so don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just know that nice wide handles make for very comfortable seam ripping, because it will happen. And then when you are done with your project, we're going to wash it and then put it in a baggie that is resealable and label it with the size. This is size 8. We chose to focus on size 8 because we realized that it's easy to make dresses for little girls when you have just little bits of fabric, but the big girls also need dresses too. So, and if you have a sewing machine or a serger, these are very handy tools. They're not necessary. You can do all of this by hand sewing. It's just a little bit more complicated and time consuming. So let's get started. All right. To cut out our fabric, we need 2 folds. So I have folded my curtain in half. We're going to cut out this. Notice it's on the fold line. Front and back, cut 2 on fold. So we're going to cut 1 here, and then I'm going to flip the pattern piece and cut the other here. We need to do the same thing with the sleeve. So there's the fold line. These edges right here are the neck edges. You'll notice this pattern piece is upside down. That's okay because this fabric does not have a directional pattern. So even if I wanted to, I could flip this one upside down to cut this way so I have all the words facing me. But if the fabric is directional, then I need to put it the exact same way. And I'd need to find a different fold line for the sleeve or flip the pattern piece upside down like this. So if it had a pattern and a definite top and a bottom, all the tops need to face the same way. But then the words are backwards. And that's okay. You can do that. You can also use scissors to cut out your pattern piece now, or you can use a rotary cutter with the mat underneath and the straight edge on the board. So I will show you the narrow hem here. I'll actually start this way for my videographer. And you can either use weights to hold down your pattern piece, or you can use pins to pin it in place. I did not show that with supplies. And if you want, you can give just a bit of an angle from the bottom of the hem towards the seam allowance. So that's using scissors. But if I wanted to use the rotary cutter and tool, I just line this edge up. Make sure not to cut off the extra paper. Unlock it so the blade comes down. Cut along the side. And stop before you go down off your board, because you don't want to, and then you lock it by moving the button the other way. You don't want to ruin the surface underneath, so the next thing you do is move your board up under the rest. Readjust your pattern piece. If it was pinned down, you wouldn't have to readjust. But since we've got weights, we have to readjust. And I like to use the board on the straight edges that I can to help keep the edges very straight. Unlock. And go to the edge. You need to have firm pressure when cutting, so that way the blade goes through all layers. And you can cut along the edge. With rounded edges, it's just a little more difficult. When you're going through. And I'll cut out this piece. All right, so we are halfway done. We've cut out our sleeve and we've cut out either the front or the back of the dress. Now we need to move to the other fold and we'll pin it or use weights. What I didn't do yet was mark the fabric. Oops. You'll notice I have notches at the edges, here and here. What we're going to do is mark them. I also have notches here and here. If you have a marking pin that's erasable, that is preferred. However, I've been unable to find them since the start of COVID. So, to mark them, I go down and I get both sides of the fabric. So you'll see little marks like this. And then we do the same here. So you'll see I have little marks like this. This will be used to match up the side of the dresses with each other and the sleeves with the dress. So I do the same here. So these marking dots will be used to match when we sew, and I'll show you when we get there. But for now, we're going to take this. If this was directional, we would have to use it upside down and backwards, so that way all the tops stay the same way. However, if you really wanted to, this one you could flip right side up so you can read it, because this pattern is non-directional. See, there's no top, there's no bottom, so you could go upside down. But for the sake of trying to maybe get a mask out of our leftover fabric here, I'm going to go right side up. So you see this excess fabric here. We might be able to get a mask that matches the dress out of this. That will be on a, probably not even on another video, because we already videotaped the mask video. And while these girls are asking for donations, they really don't care what kind of mask you make. If you make masks in a totally different way, if you make dresses in a totally different way, that's fine. The girls just want donations to go to the refugees and displaced persons in Chad, Africa. So that way the children in those camps are protected. So once again, we're going to move the mat. But the whole reason for these videos is so that if you're at a loss, you want to help, you don't know how to help, you want to sew, but you don't know how to sew, this is what the instructional videos and directions are for, that the girls have made. I need to blow my nose. so you notice that one is taken care of. We're going to do the measurement, or the marks. See the marks come off the edge. And if I had a water-soluble marker, I would mark it farther down into the fabric. But since I don't have a water-soluble marker, I'm just marking right at the edge. So now these marks match. And for the last piece,
30 seconds left on the SD card.
make sure we're lined up on the fold. No bubbles anywhere. You could use pins at this moment to pin down your pattern. However, the paper is so you'll see this is the sleeve. It was folded in half. This is how we cut it out. This is going to be a nice, fun raglan sleeve, which means that the top of the sleeve comes up to the neck edge. We're going to iron down 1/4 of an inch, which is just a little bit. And this is a curved edge, so that makes it a lot more difficult to get it nice and even. But it will look very nice when we're done. So you see the 1/4 inch is 2 lines up there. If you're doing this on centimeters, that's 1 centimeter, that's 1/2 centimeter. So it's just a smidge over 1/2 centimeter. If you did 1/2 centimeter, you'd probably be just fine. I find when I use curved edges, it's easier to do little bits with using the big, or using the little seam gauge. Now we're going to take this folded edge and go up 1/2 inch. So 1/2 inch is right here. That's 1 centimeter, 1.5 centimeters. So it's about 1.3 centimeters that we're going to go up. And the reason that we are ironing up now is because when we go to sew, all of this will be put together, and it'll be a lot harder to do an entire neck edge than it will be to just do 4 individual pieces right now. Because when it's flat with a curved edge, it's a lot easier than when it's a full circle with a curved edge. You see it curves in nicely like this. I'm just going to give it a little quick iron. And it's okay that it does this because the elastic will be in here and it will curve around the body nicely. But also while we're here, we're going to hem up the edge. And we're just going to give it a nice little narrow hem. So we're going to go up either 1/2 inch or 5/8 of an inch, which is either 1.3 or 1.6. Maybe you've got something that measures 1.5 centimeters. That'll be nice and easy for you. Best I like to hit with more steam. Cotton is a living organism, so it responds well to steam. Natural fibers love the water. And then we're going to take this edge and bring it to the fold line. So see how we have the nice crisp fold line in? We're going to take this raw edge and put it in that fold line and then fold up. So that should be about 1/4 of an inch or 0.75 centimeters. And that will be a nice narrow hem along the edge of the dress. We're going to do the same thing on the next sleeve, and then we're also going to do the same on the 2 body pieces. So I'll show you a body piece where it is 1/4 of an inch first, or you could probably do 1/2 centimeter, just a little more than. We'll iron up there. Remember, this is the advanced version, so if you are up for it, go for it. If it's a little too difficult, the pillowcase dresses are a nice alternative. And also a reminder, when you're making these dresses, please do not use solid yellow. Don't be afraid. Okay, now that we're done with the 1/4 inch here, we're going to go up to the 1/2 inch, which is about 1.3 centimeters. So right about there. Well, as I was saying, don't be afraid to use bright colors and bright patterns, but please do not use solid yellow, because that makes a political statement that the wearer might not intend. We just want to give these girls basic necessities of clothing on their bodies. We don't want to turn them into political statements. Okay, so this is also done. You'll notice it does curve, and that's okay. We want it to do that. So then if we let it open up, we're going to move down to the hem and do the same narrow hem. So I'm going to do about 5/8 inch, which is about 1.5. It says 1.6 on my measuring table, but you could probably do 1.5 centimeters. And my tool does have a curved edge, but if you notice, it's a little too curvy, so I'm still going to go flat. It does not have a 1/2 centimeter on there, or 1/2 inch. And the hem really could be any length you need it to be, want it to be, but longer is better. And now we're going to go back and put the raw edge in the folded edge. flip it and iron it flat, and it will just become a narrow hem. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and do the same narrow hem on the bottom and the bigger hem ironing on the other pieces. So I have one sleeve, one body piece done. I'm going to do the same to the other body piece and the other sleeve, and then we'll go to sew. Alright, so we've ironed up everything. I did not show you, but I did serge the edges of the dress in different spots. This way we can leave seam allowances and the fabric will continue to stay nice and even, and it won't unravel. And it allows for the dress to be altered bigger if needed. Now we're going to go on to step number 4 of our project. I've decided to call this the front and this the back. They were cut out exactly the same, so it really doesn't matter. I just, for my sake, decided that. And then we're going to take the sleeve. This will be the front of the sleeve and this will be the back of the sleeve, even though it's one piece. So counterintuitive, we're going to take the front of the dress and the front of the sleeve and put them together right sides. We're going to mark up or match up those lines that we had, those marks, and we're going to pin around here. And for the sake of the fact that I have a serger and you really don't need to alter this, I'm going to serge this line. So we start by matching up our marks. See, the pink to the pink. And we put a pin. And then we just match up the fabric so that the sides are even. And then when we sew, it'll be out like that. Then we can take the other sleeve and match right sides together. Right sides are the pretty sides. Match up the pink dots. Put a pin in it. And make sure that these are unfolded. They're not folded over to where we sewed them. Or where we ironed them. We're going to sew them later. Now we're going to sew this a 5/8 inch or 1.5 centimeters seam allowance. There and there. Alright, I'm using the serger mostly to show you what it can do. The serger has a knife that cuts off the edge and gives it this nice finished edge. I'm doing it on this seam allowance because we really don't need to alter the seam allowance. Even if you get bigger or smaller, this seam allowance won't really change. Never, ever, ever serge over a pin. It will ruin your machine and cause catastrophic damage. Make sure that the edges of the fabric are lined up and then follow along the big line. Make sure that the bottom is flat and the top is flat, because if we keep a bubble in there, it could do this, and that is not good. We need to line up the fabric. And curves are hard, so go slow. Clip and clip. That is the front of the sleeve and the front of the dress. We're going to do the other front sleeve and front of the dress. Make sure everything's nice and lined up. And clip. All right, now we have the two sleeves on the front. Now we have the back. We're actually going to flip this right side out, and we're going to sew this sleeve to this part of the back. So we're going to match up, bring our pins back, match up those pink marks, match up the bottom, and match up the top. So that will be the extra part. And then we have the other side of the sleeve going to the back of the dress. Match up the pink parts again. And then we'll come back and sew this seam. Back of the sleeve to the back of the dress. Remember to never sew over the pins, especially not with a serger. Watch out for neighborhood kids, you think they're dying. And then sew the other sleeve, back of the sleeve to the back of the dress. Alright, so now you can see we have the sleeves sewn, and we're going to now iron. We'll press it flat to warm up the seam allowance, and then we'll press it. If it was a regular seam allowance that we did with the sewing machine, we'd press it open, but instead we're going to press it towards the sleeve. Alright, so now we are going to press the seam flat, to warm it up. And then we either press it open, but in this case, because we use the serger, we're going to press it towards the sleeve. And it's always easier to do this while you're making the dress than trying to do it afterwards when it's over. It just helps the fabric lay better and the garment does exactly what you want it to do. So press it flat and then press it towards the sleeve. We'll do that again on the other sleeve. Flat, warm it up. And press it towards the sleeve. Last time. Flat, warm it up. And then press the seam allowance towards the sleeve. Almost have a dress.
Action.
Right, so now you see you almost have a dress. We actually just have to sew the side seams together. Oh, and then do a hem and a casing, but you're almost done. We're on step 5. What we're going to do now is we are going to match up our sleeve seams and pin them. And we match up our pink notches and the end of the fabric. And we have more notches here. We match those up and pin it all the way down to the end of the dress. And this will be our side seam. I'm going to sew this one on the sewing machine. Those match. And we're going to do the same on the other side seam. I'm going to match up the sleeve seams. One way to tell if the sleeve seams are matched is you put the the pin in where the stitching is. And if it comes out where the stitching is, that's how you know it's lined up. And then the pink is matching and the end is matching. Was it action?
Action.
Okay, now we're going to sew the side seam. A general side seam or general seam allowance is 5/8 inch, or my machine is metric, so it's 1.5 centimeters. So we line up the edge of the fabric with 1.5 centimeters. We put the presser foot down, go forward a few, back stitch. That creates a knot, so we just clip at the end, and then forward. Some people say you can sew over pins here. I don't recommend it. Okay. This is the tricky part. You can see the seam allowance of the sleeve here, and this one wants to go backwards. I like them both to go the same way, so I like to flip it under. kind of pivot the fabric and make sure that it's nice along the edge, lined up with the 1.5 centimeter. And just guide the fabric through. Takes repositioning the fabric, that's okay. If you stop, you should always stop with the needle in the fabric. Reposition the fabric so it's not falling off. Go just to the edge, back up, and forward. Once you come to the edge of the fabric, no need to sew anymore. And because you did the back stitch, you can clip right at the edge. Go back up to the front and clip off right at the edge. Now we're going to sew the other side seam. Remember, it's 1.5. Remember, we get close, see how the seam wants to go away. We still want it to go towards the sleeve, so I like to lift up the seam allowance, make sure that both sides are still going towards the sleeve. Then we pivot the fabric to keep going with the 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Up to the edge, go back, and go forward. Once you get off the fabric, there is no need to keep sewing because there's nothing there. Clip, and clip. Now we're going to go to the iron. We're going to iron it flat to warm it up, and then we're going to press it open. Okay. We're going to press it flat to warm it up. And then we're going to press open the sleeve seam. And if the young girl who receives this dress ever needs to alter it, she has that much seam allowance to play with. And if you have this special tool called a sleeve board, it makes ironing sleeves very easy and helpful. That is pressing one side flat and open. We're going to do the second side. Pressing flat. And then pressing open. then you'll see we just did our narrow hem here at the bottom that we've already ironed. You just need to fold that in. And that's actually the next step, is sewing in the hems on both the bottom and the sleeves. But to continue pressing this seam open, use the sleeve board. And then we're also going to, what we've already ironed, we're just going to press up. Next step is pressing these, or sewing these narrow hems that we already ironed on the sleeve and on the other sleeve. Give that another little press. If you need to use pins, you can use pins, or if you're a more advanced seamstress, the fact that you've ironed it will be sufficient enough. And then I'll iron up this last bit. And same thing with this hem on the bottom. If you want pins, go for pins. If you don't want pins, you don't need them. All right, we're going to go sew in all of the hems.
Action.
Step number 6 is to narrow hem the dress. An easy way to make sure that it's not going to get stuck around is to either sew on the top or take this off and sew around the inside like this. I always start at the seam, forward a little bit, back a little, and forward all the way around. Make sure that the needle is in when we stop sewing and start fiddling with it, and then make sure it's tucked in and ready to go. Once it's sewn like that, pull away. Check to make sure that you encased the entire sleeve. And then one thing I like to do, if I can, is pull to get the thread inside. I didn't do that with the first one, so for that I'll just clip it off and clip off the one that's outside. And then I do like to finish it off by tying a knot. And clip. If you don't have the ability to take this piece off of your machine, I'll show you what we do for the other sleeve. We sew on the outside of the sleeve, but then we have to make sure that everything's tucked in nice and tight before we go. Once again, start at the seam. Make sure that it's tucked in. Have it tucked in there. Continue to tuck. continue to tuck. And continue. And we try to match up as soon as we can. We pull and clip. And then we pull it to the inside, see if we can pull the threads that way. I like to tie a knot to keep the threads on that side of the fabric. Don't cut off the knot. That's counterintuitive. And then that is your sleeve that way. And that's just a frayed edge that you've tucked in, so just give it a clip and it'll be just fine. You told me to stop. All right, now we're going to sew the hem of the dress. Start at one of the side seams and we try to sew as close to the edge of the hem as we can. We chose to do a narrow hem because the longer the dress, the better. Steps forward, back, and we continue forward. And this is where some people like to use pins. And if you've ironed very well, you don't need pins. There, I got a little wonky, so I need to hold it down. You're always looking a little bit ahead when you are sewing your hems without pinning. Always end with the needle in the fabric. Tuck and go straight. And there I went a little bit close to the edge, but it actually made it in, so I should be fine. When we get to the other hem or side seam, we're halfway done. Make sure it's nice and tucked and that it matches up. And where the fabric's thicker, slow down. Match up our threads, back stitch and forward, pull and flip. Make sure that we got all of the hem in. We did. If we can, pull the thread so it comes to the inside of our garment. That one's not going to. And tie the knots together. And clip, don't cut off the knot. And this one is nice and tight. Clip there. All right, now we're going back up to the top of the dress. And this is what I decided was the back of the dress. So what we're going to do is leave a 2-inch, 5-centimeter opening where we pinned it. So I'll have green for go and red for stop. So that is where we're going to thread through our elastic. The rest of this we're going to pin down our casing, and then we're going to edge stitch right along the bottom here. Your sleeve went towards the seam. And this is the tricky part because it's all rounded edges. So if the side seam or the sleeve seams don't fabulously match up, that's okay. And this is why we ironed it beforehand, because imagine trying to iron in all of these seam allowances now that it's actually sewn. So now we're going to sew this seam casing all the way around, leaving the gap in the middle. We're going to stitch very close to the edge. Now we're red for stop. Back up, go forward. That just helps lock in the stitches. Pull it and cut it. I like to pull these in and tie the knots. And sometimes need a little assist from a pin to pull up the loop. Oops. And sometimes you get the whole thread and sometimes you don't get it. When that happens, just trust your knots and clip them off. On this side, I'm going to give it a quick tie. Okay, stop. All right, now we've made the casing around the dress. We checked to make sure that we actually caught all the edges inside the dress, and we did. Fabulous. Our directions say we need 24 inches of elastic, so I've cut that. On one side, I put a pin perpendicular. The other side, I put it in parallel. We're going to take the parallel pin and start threading it through our casing. We're going to go all the way around. And hopefully our perpendicular pin stops it from going all the way through the fabric. The trickiest parts will be where the sleeves go opposite with their seam allowance. So like this one right here, we need to check to make sure that we actually go through the middle of the casing, not get caught up in one of the sides. Luckily it's a tiny little seam allowance, so it's not that bad. If we'd used a bigger seam allowance like the side seams, that would be more tricky. You can see pulling it, the perpendicular is almost to the end. But then again, so are we. We only have to go that much farther. But this is where the gathering comes from for the dress, around the top. So we'll make a nice neckline. Oh, here's that other sleeve. Could feel myself get caught on there a little bit. Alright, so now we have come all the way around. We feel to make sure that what is here versus what is here is not twisted. So we're going to overlap by 5/8 of an inch or 2 centimeters. And pin it shut for right now. And then feel to make sure that the elastic did not twist. Because if the elastic twisted, then it will remain twisted in the dress. Oops, I feel a twist. You can see the twist in the elastic right there. So we massage it out towards the end. Right. Now that we've done that, we're going to pin it again and give it one more check. I like to go backwards this time. And that is nice and flat. So now we're going to take these pieces of elastic. Can't really sew with a safety pin in. And we are going to overlap by 5/8 of an inch or 2 centimeters. And we're going to sew this elastic shut. Since it's so tiny, I like to go sideways and do a zigzag pattern. It does help if the elastic likes to be pinned and stay pinned, which sometimes it does and sometimes it doesn't. Elastic is not made out of natural materials, so it does not like to do things that we'd like it to do easily. Remember how I said don't ever sew over pins? We did 2 stitches to get the elastic started, and now we go to our zigzags. And then I back up and keep going forward. And back up. I do that a few times just to make sure that it stays nice and secure in the dress. All right, now we're just gonna, now that our elastic is sewn shut, we're gonna sew the rest of the casing shut. So make sure that your stitch pattern is back on straight stitch instead of zigzag. We're going to match up the threads. Go forward, backward. Forward, backward. Notice if the threads don't match up, it leaves a mark, but this is the back of the dress, so maybe nobody will notice. And we pull the threads into the back and tie them off. If we had a tag, we would have put the tag in right where we were sewing that. That's weird, it's like it skipped a whole stitch. My machine. It doesn't want to pull through. And that is the end of that dress.
Action.
Okay, so when you are done sewing your dress, we ask that you launder it and then put it in a resealable plastic bag that has the size on it. Fold it up. Squeeze out as much air as you can. And then please bring it to the Patch Arts and Crafts store so we can donate these as part of our Silver Award project. Thank you.